Hi, thanks so much for being here today. I'm Alex Judelsohn. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University at Buffalo State University of New York. I'll be presenting my research titled Planning Resettlement, Assessing Governance Gaps in the U.S. Resettlement Program. And before I begin, I just want to make a note about the use of the term refugee. I typically don't like to use this term. I would maybe refer to people as new Americans or immigrants. I don't think refugee is a static marker of someone's identity, but it does denote people that come to the US with a certain visa status that are able to access a slew of benefits that other immigrants cannot use or have access to. So that's why I use that term here. So the Office of Refugee Resettlement states that the goal of the resettlement program is to provide new populations with the opportunity to achieve their full potential in the United States. But unfortunately, as Tang says, this is a broken promise, not an impossible one. The US is one of the top resettlement countries worldwide, but limited resettlement services and the realities of urban life contribute to compounding challenges for refugees, and there is an outside assumption that local resettlement agencies fully meet the needs of refugees. And before I go further, I want to share a bit about these three groups of stakeholders in resettlement that I focus on and the roles that they play, including these local resettlement agencies. So the resettlement agencies are funded by the federal government to administer resettlement services, but only for 90 days. This can be extended to 8 months, but they don't receive any additional funding. And this funding is pretty small. It's under $3,000 per person. It includes, setting up a house, getting them paying the case manager. It's a pretty small amount of money. Resettlement agencies do seek out funding, additional funding, but that isn't used for a caseworker to be working with a client one-on-one. And the federal refugee resettlement system really operates by enacting neoliberal governmentality through priorities laid out in the program and the mandates for enacting these, all with the refugee as the subject of this. So an example of this is through work-first policies. And resettlement agencies are evaluated on how quickly their clients gain economic independence. So in turn, the resettlement agencies focus on clients that have a promise for that. So competition really becomes this legitimate organizing principle for human activity. And here on the slide, on the left-hand side, these are the 9 national examples of 3 of the 9 national resettlement agencies. And then on the right-hand side, you see 3 examples of the local resettlement agencies, which are all affiliated with a national one. The second actor that I'm going to talk about are local and county governments. So they can step in to address a number of challenges that refugees face. And specifically, I'm talking about the tools that urban planners have to work on resettlement issues. And local and county governments don't have a formal role in deciding whether refugees will be placed in their city. Refugees come to the U.S. in a different way than other immigrants. They are paired with this resettlement agency, so they end up moving to a specific locality. They can move, but that kind of dictates where they end up moving. But local and county governments are really uniquely positioned to pioneer innovative and practical solutions to challenges that often cannot be addressed at the state and federal level. But unfortunately, I and other scholars critique the current resettlement system and the way that planners tend to see refugees as operating through a neoliberal framework. And by neoliberal, I mean that both the national refugee resettlement system and city governments tend to view refugees from an economic lens. So refugees improve the local economies of cities that are deemed as, in need of revitalization, while also playing a limited role in other aspects of resettlement or the broader roles and needs of refugees. And we often see local governments provide lip service in support of refugee communities. On the left-hand side, this is a photograph of a flag that says "Refugees Welcome" that is in front of the city of Buffalo's City Hall. And this lip service is helpful. Receptiveness to accepting refugees does influence resettlement outcomes, but it's not enough. And the other 2 images here are screenshots from a welcome plan and a New American Study, which are other initiatives that local and county governments are taking to support refugees. And then the last entity that I'm going to talk about are refugee-led community organizations that assist refugees in their new homes. Refugee community organizations are often not recognized, but they're really an integral part of the resettlement system. We know that they fill in the gaps in services that are not addressed by resettlement agencies or any other local government offices. They're often informal. Many do not have a nonprofit or 501c3 status, and because of this, they're not counted in official data. And they're really at the front and center of my research, as these, refugee-run organizations empower refugees by engaging in awareness raising with the dominant population and also drawing on their own experiences of reciprocity, solidarity, and mutual help. And so these are logos of two organizations that I worked with. So my research questions are twofold. So the first set of questions are, does planning serve the multidimensional needs of refugees? If planning does not, who fills the gap and how do they do so? And then secondly, what can urban planning officials learn from the organizations that serve those that arrive as refugees? My theoretical framework that I use comes from multicultural and insurgent planning. So Sandercock and Umamoto's work on planning from below and planning for multicultural communities aims to create narratives that encompass an array of voices in planning decision making. These scholars say that we need to think systematically and critically about what planners do to create more inclusive cities to help us become reflective practitioners. And when what they call planning from below, they say we can both articulate difference and find common ground across differences within planning processes, both blending the knowledge of the traditional and non-traditional planner. But this also, doesn't always work. And when this fails, Miraftab's theory of insurgent planning can fill the gap. And under a neoliberal framework, Miraftab argues that planners promote what she calls symbolic inclusion, but not redistributive equity. And insurgent planning disrupts these processes as people come with their own terms of engagement, either through what she calls invited spaces. So these are spaces where people leverage spaces with public engagement that local governments create, or through what she calls invented spaces. So these are strategies used by people who are sidelined by formal planning processes to challenge the status quo and assert their right to the city. So my research design is a comparative case study of two counties in the United States, Kent County, Michigan, and Erie County, New York. They're both in the northern part of the country, kind of on the eastern side of the Midwest. So the gray that you can see here are the Great Lakes, the darker gray. So in selecting these cases, I looked at the top resettlement cities of similar population size. Those that had over 3,000 refugees were settled there between 2012 and 2016. That's the data that were available. And I also selected cities based on other variables that refugee scholars say are critical for ensuring a supportive environment, such as similar poverty rates, affordable housing, use of public transit for work, and the population of foreign-born. I also considered local and state immigration policy and assessed whether or not there was an Office of New Americans or any plans or studies for New Americans. So I was looking for two places that were relatively similar on variables mentioned here, other than having different state and local immigration policies and offices. So both counties both have major cities in the county, and both of those cities, Grand Rapids and Buffalo, are the second largest in the state. Grand Rapids didn't have the severe population loss that Buffalo experienced, but West Michigan is really trying to retain population. One difference is that Kent County is industrial. There's a lot of factory work, auto manufacturing, meat packing, while Erie County is post-industrial, and both have similar percentages of foreign-born populations. I'm going to briefly just go over this policy timeline of resettlement-related policies. So in Erie County, the city of Buffalo formed an Office of New Americans in 2015, and they published a New American study, and kind of nothing happened for many years. And then in 2021, the one staff person in the Office of New Americans left, and a new employee started in 2022. And actually, last I heard, it was vacant once again. And they did get some funding from this national nonprofit called Welcoming America to do a report called Gateways for Growth, which is about the economic contribution of refugees. And then the next step would be funding a welcome plan, but that didn't happen, or going through welcoming certification, which the funding was secured for that, but they haven't done it yet. And in Kent County, Michigan, their Gateways for Growth research report, this is that economic development report, was published in 2018, and they quickly received funding to write a welcome plan, which was launched in 2020, which was a very unfortunate time to publish this plan. Part of the plan reveal was a public event, but that was in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was kind of a quiet launch. And then in 2022, they hired a welcome plan coordinator to implement the plan. So my research is qualitative, it's inductive. I conducted interviews and a focus group with government representatives, refugee community leaders, resettlement agency representatives, and nonprofit representatives. I went to community events, and I also looked at policy documents to understand how the practices and the framings related to refugees have kind of changed over time. I looked at strategic plans from the refugee community organizations. I looked at the Welcome Plan for Kent County, the City of Buffalo New American Study, and then the comprehensive plans for both cities, Kent, Grand Rapids, and Buffalo. And I really tried to work alongside community members. I had fact checkers from refugee communities who were compensated for their time. And my findings, I'm just sharing a snippet right now. So, as I mentioned, I looked at these 4 plans, both welcome plans and comprehensive plans, to see, how do they address the needs of refugees, if at all. And for those that aren't familiar, comprehensive plans are routine at the local government level in the U.S., and they really provide a long-term vision for a place, typically with input from residents. Welcome plans are less routine, but sometimes they're drafted at the local or county government level in an effort to support immigrant populations. So I analyzed these 4 plans using Auger and Strang's conceptual framework of integration as a lens, as this provides a more holistic view of what is crucial for refugee integration. And within their conceptual framework, there are 4 levels and 10 domains. So here we see which domains are included in the plans. So first we see which domains were included in welcome plans. Generally, most are, except for health, and then housing and social links were only included in the Buffalo New American Study. Then next we see which domains were included in the comprehensive plans. Still, many are, although social connections less so, but inclusion in plans really is only one part of the work. If and how those plans are actually implemented is one piece of it. How local and county governments worked with other refugee-serving entities and also listen to and interact with and get buy-in from community members in plan-making processes is also crucial. So this next piece is looking at the percentage of interview respondents from these 4 different domains: government, which included state, county, and local representatives, local resettlement agencies, other nonprofits that serve refugees, and then also refugee community leaders, and whether they report whether government, resettlement agency, and refugee community organizations support refugees in their new life in their new homes. So, as you can see in the first column, all sectors see that and view the local resettlement agencies as doing work, but remember, they are funded to do this for a very short period of time. Interestingly, refugee-run community organizations don't view local and county government as being involved in supporting refugees in their new homes. And then local and county and state governments, only 28% view or recognize the work that refugee community organizations do. And as I outlined in the beginning, they are pretty important players in serving the needs of their communities. So what I'm going to show next is this kind of arc of engagement in planning from local and county governments to refugee community organizations, and how support is actually enacted or not enacted. So this local resettlement agency worker said that they, the local government, would do employment. We all said, wait a minute. No, we, the resettlement agencies, would all run employment programs. It doesn't make any sense for you to do employment. How about you do housing or public safety? Something that we don't do. At the end of the meeting, we said, let's meet again and keep talking about it. And the government official said, nah, I don't want to. So this was a meeting with the multiple resettlement agency workers in this city, along with a government official, saying, let's prioritize work and collaborate together. And the local government official was just not interested in collaborating. In this example, so this is the community engagement for the Kent County Welcome Plan, and this included 800 surveys, 25 focus groups, We got a lot of feedback and information from our new American community to focus on what was an actual priority. But in the back of the plan, this is a screenshot from the back of the plan, and it basically says, there were certain issues and barriers that certain demographic groups brought up. And while, we hear that, we didn't include this in the plan because this is not our problem. This is a state level issue. And this person says, whoever made that decision to not include those items in the plan, I'm not saying they're bad people. It just got so whitewashed at the end. I think it's really important that if we could go over it again, it's those values. What does that look like? If we say equity and justice, what does that mean? Just like respect looks differently for you or for me, we have to be really clear in what that means. So they're kind of actively, the local government, or whoever wrote this plan, the county government in this instance, is actively not listening. And then when it comes to buy-in from the community, a refugee community leader said, so when something is coming from the government, families are suspicious. When you say welcome plan and it is not stamped by a community leader or by their religious leader or anything, they just go through the motions. So when we asked leaders from the refugee community, how do you interact with the welcome plan? What does it mean to you? Is it important? They don't see it as a useful document for them. And then lastly, this is a long one, so I'm going to let you read it to yourself. So this refugee community leader is kind of saying, even though they've been kind of left to work on their own, they're really still trying to operate within this government structure. So the state level coordinator in the state created this formal platform for refugee voices within the confines of government, and they are trying to work through this. So kind of, from these findings, we can make strong research-based recommendations on how we can improve planning processes, making outcomes that will be more inclusive. So I'll talk about these 3 guiding principles of insurgent planning that refugee community organizations use in their work and how planners can adopt these principles. And so in my findings, I've kind of shared, how local and county governments fell short, but I'm going to now share how refugee community organizations meet the needs of their communities effectively. So RCOs are transgressive. They take the time to build trust and community ties. They hold on to values and principles from their cultures. Capitalism really leads to a culture of urgency, and for planners, building trust takes time, and sometimes it's not within the confines of a grant cycle. So it's important to be working on these relationships throughout time. Secondly, RCOs are counter-hegemonic. They insist on citizens' rights to rebel and determine their own terms of engagement and participation. Planners can meet their constituents in the ways that residents want to engage, whether it be, making sure community leaders are involved, getting buy-in from community leaders, or creating an advisory board. And by listening deeply and in an empathetic way while reflecting on our own positions, we can meet people at their terms of engagement. And lastly, refugee community organizations are imaginative. I think we saw this in this last quote. There are other alternatives. There's hope, and these activities are all leading to that. This last quote about not accepting things the way they are when people don't have these basic needs, and they're going to continue to fight for that. So what are some key takeaways from this work? We see that representation does not equate to leadership, and when governments approach work through a market-based lens and don't address the full needs of the public, distrust forms and refugee community organizations figure it out on their own through these kind of invited spaces of insurgent planning that I brought up earlier. So planning can continuously reinvent itself and strive for greater inclusion and equity by paying attention to hidden issues like those faced by refugees. And in this environment where resources are limited, we need to bolster the work of community-led organizations. And lastly, actors occupy different spaces, and putting boundaries on these spaces makes us forget that people are moving and transient and occupy spaces in different ways. I'm thinking of one of my community partners and the dual role that he plays. Sometimes spaces are palpable and clear, and sometimes they are not. They're integrated. But creating invented spaces takes a lot of time for refugee community leaders rather than, being in a space that a government might set up, like an advisory board. And the need for these invented spaces really reduces as empowerment and representation goes up in organizations and institutions like local and county governments and resettlement agencies. So I just want to say thank you for being here, for listening. Please reach out with any questions and comments. Here's my email, and I would love to continue the conversation. Thanks.